the case of my son, he knows that his father's a white man. And he recognizes that as much as we love each other.
Oh, Thomas Jefferson, you are as great a wit as you are a statesman.
Gentlemen, if you'd like to adjourn to the dining room, dinner is nearly served.
Maria?
Yes, Father?
Who is that?
That's Sally Hemings, Father, the new slave you inherited.
I hope you'll be very happy here with us.
Well, I'm just happy to be indoors, thank you.
Everybody knows it. Thomas Jefferson only dates black chick.
Your hair is so unusual. May I touch it?
Sure.
He doesn't waste any time, does he?
What time do you get off work?
Never.
I think I could love you, Sally Hemings.
You're the boss.
Warm welcome back, familia. A very good morning to you, or evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in this world watching this video on interracial marriages under the imperialism structure. So today I'm joined with the one, the only, Stephen Brawer. Happy New Year, Stephen.
Happy New Year, Tom, and good evening to you from here in Stockholm.
Yeah, because you're in Sweden right now, aren't you? Alongside you being an educator of philosophical education and conspiracies, you're also an entrepreneur alongside many other avenues. But that is not just the makeup of who you are. You're also a father, I guess a partner, a husband to a beautiful Ugandan woman of 25 years, if that's accurate. That's accurate, right?
Correct. I'm happy to join you. Yeah, okay. I can say that I don't know how extensive my knowledge is about the question of white supremacy, although it's something that I find detestable. I always have. For most of my life, I have always fought against injustice and considered that in terms of the history and the question of colonialism against African nations and Africa as a continent to be a serious moral dilemma for mankind. I didn't. I wouldn't say that I anticipated earlier in my life to having ended up marrying an African. I don't think those things are often planned. At least it wasn't for me consciously, but it became that, and couldn't be happier that in the course of having met my wife and the years of marriage we have children who I'm proud to have as my children, and 2 girls and a boy, or a son, but they're grown. It's a joy that I have in my lifetime, and I'm happy to share what I can with you about what I've learned in the course of that experience. As growing up in the United States, where I did, as a young man, was aware of I was born in 1951, so during the 1960s, with the whole emergence of the civil rights movement, and although I was born in New York, we moved to Maryland and Virginia, which tended to be more oriented to the southern states. And under those conditions, one during my youth clearly saw the signs of racism that existed at that time, even in the course of forbidding Black Americans from buying certain property. And then there, of course, were very clear laws in many states that prohibited interracial marriage, given the changes that have occurred since, since the death of the murder of Martin Luther King, and many of the changes in a certain kind of way that have been achieved in the United States. But that does not mean that racism as a phenomenon has disappeared. And I think everybody who either is involved in interracial, has been in interracial marriage, or even not necessarily realizes that the problem of racism is still a serious problem. It hasn't been eliminated, and I think there are great challenges in order to address that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were still pretty much aware growing up of racial injustices. There's nothing worse than getting with someone who unfortunately isn't aware of their own entitlements, their privileges due to their race. So are you saying that you already had, I guess, exposure to that?
Yeah, I did. Even at the time when I was in grade school, there's something that you never forget, because I was at an elementary school, and this was in the state of Maryland, where I was probably about 9 or 10, I think, maybe 10. And it was I would say for me, it was a somewhat shocking experience when we were climbing up the stairs, and there was a white fellow who was not happy that there was a younger black American girl in his way, and he tried to push and spit on her. And I got into a fight with him about that. I wouldn't put up with it. I was a bit shocked, but I reacted directly that no, that's really insane.
There's nothing I respect more than someone speaking out, stepping in to injustices, and most importantly, bullying. And I guess a lot of people do feel as though within white privilege, a lot of people would rather not say anything. They'd rather just act oblivious. What has differed you ingraining that conditioning of white supremacy into your mindset?
It's a hard question to answer. I can say that my mother was an activist in her own right. She was extremely involved in supporting civil rights to the degree that she could. She was also at a later time in her life, a poet and an organizer of what at that time was in Washington, D.C., very unusual, which is a black poetry, and would organize some of the leading black poets. She has passed away, but I still have some of the books that she put together with. Sterling Brown was one of the great African-American poets, but very few of them were given the status that they should have been. And that was a project that she devoted a good part of her life to correcting. So I say that not because maybe it's the complete explanation, because we're all individuals, but there was, at least in that context, a clear vision on her part that racism and discrimination was something very, very wrong. I mean, this is not only for me, but anyone who listens to King's speech in Memphis, where he was killed, the mountaintop, you're aware that he knows that he will sacrifice his life in order to maintain the fight for the principles that he knew were correct, and that is immortality.
When I was studying in America, so I ended up living in the States for a bit, so I knew I had to visit Memphis. I know everyone, like, at the time was talking about Graceland. That's where Elvis Presley has his little setup. But I said to myself, I want to visit the motel that Martin Luther King was shot at, because I guess they made it all touristy now, converted it into a museum. But they haven't, where he was shot, they haven't touched that premises. And you still got the bloodstains where all the forensics were
I didn't know that. I had not been there. I actually did at a time when I was traveling in the U.S. My family, with my wife and my children, were in Atlanta, and there was the Martin Luther King Center there, which was set up by Martin Luther King's wife, Coretta King, and there are extremely good historical books. I basically have read almost everything that Martin Luther King wrote. The nature of his thinking is not always so directly accessible if one doesn't dig into it. And my children have always been very aware of the importance that I've attached to the fight that King made for racial justice.
Why does Mr. King stand out to you the most?
Well, I agree with you. There are many individuals, many who are not necessarily even known, but gave their lives for what they believed was the fight for justice. So it's not to dismiss the fact that Malcolm X made his endeavor. I think he made a very significant input into that fight and was eliminated perhaps by similar forces that were involved in eliminating Dr. King. Many Black Americans who have also stood out and devoted their lives to that fight. And continue to do that. And it was very clear that King understood that the issue of civil rights was intricately connected to the question of economic justice. At the present time, in most of the Western civilization, that problem, which is clearly connected to racial injustice, is still an abysmal problem that has to be turned around. Even before I actually met my wife here in Sweden, was working actively on the question of economic justice for the continent of Africa and for African nations, and was involved in identifying the unjust role of the financial system of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. It was a clear and obvious form of neocolonialism.
What is your understanding of white supremacy?
Well, I think it's a sickness that has emerged because of the imperial policy that was imposed not only on Black Africa, it was imposed on South America, parts of Asia. It's not unique, but the British Empire, in my view, is still a active imperial force, although most people do not see it that way. What became a practice of race science, which was even actively pursued and in a leading role in Sweden during the 1920s, and was carried out here in Uppsala University, where they were claiming to be scientific studies in the size of the skull to demonstrate why Black Africans were mentally inferior. Sickest part of the violence and the racist, even Ku Klux Klan and so forth. It's a sickness, and it's a problem that many, I think, the people who have it suffer because of their inability to overcome that ignorance. I mean, China has an enormous, deep and wealth cultural history that goes back 5,000 years. That's also connected to Confucius and the notion of the morality and the harmony of the individual, which I think is a very big part of the thinking and the philosophy of the leader of China right now. and why he took that initiative in 2013 for the Belt and Road, nor do they come in and say you have to follow such conditionalities before we're going to give you, quote, support or money, which the IMF and the World Bank did at all times. For me, what I think is truthful, I will always defend, whether somebody finds it difficult or not. Raw materials by themselves are not wealth. There are many raw materials in Africa that have been exploited precisely for the reason that they were significant. The independent advancement of Africa as a continent, which could be without question the bread supplier of the world. And if the power of understanding scientifically what creates economic wealth, which has been denied by the same imperial forces, because in order to exploit, you have to keep people ignorant of the actual nature of economic science. China has interests, but their interest, I believe, is not to take over Africa. Their interest is to work together, as they state in the Belt and Road.
Like you said, I guess it can get very controversial. So it's because of the nature of, I suppose, the topic. We'll just stick to topic, and it can obviously loop into one, into the other, into the other, into the other.
I've had extreme amount of very good contact with diplomatic leaders in Sweden who are African leaders, and they keep coming back with the fact that there is so much negative that is constantly bombarding the press in the West and in Europe, that people get a completely incorrect and false view of life and how life is. Now, there is, unfortunately, I've been there, poverty that should not exist. There are people, in many cases, much happier and with their lives in Africa. They dance, they enjoy their lives, they fight for happiness whatsoever. I think it's hardly intentional.
I think it's also important to remember that poverty exists everywhere.
With that said, I think that there are certain things which are a marking of the sickness of colonialism. Only 11% of the African trade is between African nations. Almost 90% of all trade is outside of Africa. Primarily the British, but others were building railroads only into the mines and then to the coast, because that way they could exploit and gather raw materials. What is necessary in terms of transforming Africa is to build the infrastructure, the modern rail system from Dakar to Djibouti, not from the mines to the coast, but across the whole continent.
When we have had great, amazing Black leaders or presidents who have been, I guess, focused on maybe having more trading happening between African countries, unfortunately, you no longer hear about them.
I give you the one point you were raising. I just say that one of the leaders of the early African independence, Nkrumah, but he was explicitly told in the most disgusting form of racial policy that we can't tolerate black Africans having that kind of advanced scientific technology. The Swedish system is a control system. The power structure is, and what we could call the oligarchy, the control mechanism, the power structure of the Swedish state, which is combined in a sense between the monarchy, the leading financial forces, which are connected with a entrepreneurial family and banking family, the Wallenbergs. You almost have to sacrifice your identity as a human being and what you are in order to become, quote, Swedish. But that's something that virtually every Black experiences in Sweden. You're told that you are equal, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty, you know that you are definitely not on the same level or considered in the same way.
That sounds like Europe to me. We accept you to a certain level, but then as quick as we are to take you in, we're quick to spit you out.
Most people have the image of Sweden as being blonde, blue eyes, Aryans. But nonetheless, she also recognizes that, as you, I think, also have, Tom, that Americans have certain limitations in understanding the reality of other cultures, other languages, that they're not just places on a map, but they're real people with real language and thought differences than the Americans have. I mean, especially in the case of my son, he knows that his father's a white man. And he recognizes that as much as we love each other with all our hearts, that the society still makes these disgusting discriminations, which he's experienced in his lifetime. And you can't get around that. I can't wave a magic wand and say, okay, let's change everything about the social circumstances that people are forced to live with. But I understand that there's anger, there is frustration and resentment by the very nature of the imperialist side, which has created this racist phenomenon. If you get pulled into too much into the anger, the enemies of humanity are the winners. That's what they want. That's part of their game, to destroy people, to enrage them, and to force them into circumstances where they feel hopeless and desperate. The interaction and the beauty of interracial children is such that it's worth the fight to make sure that we lift humanity to a better state. The film that you recommended for me, it's a very heavy film, but I think it's quite a good film in showing some of the dilemmas and in many cases the more tragic circumstances which can emerge. But the world is unfortunately not how it should be. So that's why I can recommend in terms of this interview that we work to achieve the goal that we all should fight for, which is to eliminate racism, to enjoy the differences between human beings which do exist and are part of our nature and the world.
So I was going to say, on that note, I wanted to pick your brains on how well you know Uganda. So I did write a few things down. So, what is the city of Uganda?
Well, the capital city is Kampala. My wife is not from Kampala, though. She comes from Mbale, which is the eastern part of Uganda.
Very nice. What are the two main spoken languages in Uganda?
Well, English is the national language, and Luganda is the main language of but there are many different tribes, and there are about 32 different languages in Uganda. But she speaks Lugishu, Luganda, Lugweri. Her mother is basically native speaker of Lugweri. Some of these are similar. Lugishu is very different from Luganda. I can hear the differences, but I'm unfortunately not fluent in any sense, able to have a discussion in one of the Ugandan languages. I know a few words. I can say greetings.
Okay, say those greetings. Let's hear them.
Oliocha Sebo, which is how are you, sir? Oliocha Nyabo, which is how are you, madam.
Where does Uganda fall as the world's freshest water lake?
Well, there's Lake Victoria, there's Lake Albert, but many of these, and then of course the source of the Nile is in Jinja, which is between Kampala and Mbali, where my wife is.
Uganda falls as number one, so the world's freshest water lake is at number one. I also saw things like Uganda designs their own cars, and fried grasshoppers are a popular Ugandan delicacy.
Exactly. Yes.
Have you tried?
Once in a while, but it's. I think my wife and my wife's niece are always trying to get me to eat them. I'm not real keen on eating them. And then they have matoki, which is the main. It's a kind of green banana that, it's very good. And if you would ever come this way, I'm sure that we could invite you for some real Ugandan dinners.
We have to organize that for some time.
It's so green and shockingly beautiful in terms of the beauty of the landscape and the environment, which it's nothing like anything in Europe. Obviously, it's tropical.
I'm telling you. Unfortunately, one day, hopefully, I'll go. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, you should go. It's a wonderful. It's right on the equator, and there's even an area in the western part of Uganda which is towards Rwanda, where there's like a place where, as you go from one side to the other of the equator, there is a change in the magnetism, even with the history of what I had told you about my mother. At the time when we were married, she was alive, and she was actually came to attend the wedding, and she was so touched and happy. And my father, although he didn't make the trip, became like a father to my wife, and she had never forgotten. He's also passed away, but the way that he treated her was, for her, the highest form of respect and dignity.
I'm sure as a father, you get to witness everything your family goes through, but you'll never be able to truly experience it. So I'm assuming your way of getting this far with your family has been, I guess, listening to everybody, and that truly is a beautiful environment to grow any family in, where everyone's heard, everyone's listened to, everyone has a voice.
Chinese have a good expression that a problem is really a challenge. And I think that's a good expression, that we have challenges, but if we meet those challenges in the right way, we'll continue to go forward.
Absolutely. I guess get to know everything, all the little facts and funny parts about your traditions and your culture and what makes you you. And I think that's what any
good advice.
Wants. Sorry?
That's good advice for a successful relationship.
And I'm smiling from ear to ear because I've just noticed, I guess, the portrait at the back of your wife.
Yeah, that actually is a portrait of my wife when she graduated from the university in Iraq, where she studied. Actually, she speaks Arabic as well.
Wow, she's a catch.
Famous at her teaching at her school for being the most popular among all the students. So yeah, she's a remarkable person, and I'm sure you'll have a chance to meet and talk with her at some point.
Absolutely, by God's grace. What do you hope your relationship will project to your kids about love?
Well, I mean, I hope that it's transmitted as a living entity. That if it works, it's not some abstract thing. It's a living process, a dynamic that people see and hear and experience, and in all sorts of ways, and in life together, respecting, trying to do things for each other. Times it can be a struggle to push aside what you want to do in order to give somebody else but what they want to do. But yeah, if you're serious about achieving things, and I think that's not only interracial marriage. I think it's probably the case in all marriage, that you have to want to find and touch your partner in the soul and their heart, if you want things to work. Sometimes when quarrels come up, not necessarily between myself, but I've seen them come up in certain relationships between interracial relationships, in which one of the partners said, "Well, I haven't done anything wrong. Why are you angry? Why are you upset at me?" And when I was reflecting on it, I said, well, it's not a matter of whether you did anything wrong. It's a matter of, did you do something right? And that's a big difference. That's an active commitment to knowing the person in order to be able to address things in the right way. And that takes insight. That's something that too many people lack. And if you don't have that, I tend to think, or if your partner wouldn't have that, I would tend to think that it wouldn't work very well.
Yeah, and on that note, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, spending time with you as always. Always, as I said, guys, from the beginning, always a pleasure talking to Stephen. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining me today and be willing, I guess, to talk about this topic. I've really appreciated everything we've discussed. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to talking with you in the future as well.
Always. All right. Wishing you a great evening, okay? All right. We'll speak soon.
The same. The same to you. Thank you so much for this evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.